Why would an 18-year veteran dispatcher abandon her post during the most critical phase of a wildfire? With her coffee still warm, her purse in the drawer, and two unidentified voices captured in the background of her final transmission. At 11:47 p.m. on August 23, 2023, Rebecca Hartwell radioed a routine status update from the Stillwater County Communications Hub. Fire Command, this is Stillwater Communications. Current incident status, 2,400 acres, 35% contained. Then, silence. When a deputy arrived at the reinforced concrete bunker 56 minutes later, the security door stood ajar, every radio still functioning, every monitor still displaying real-time fire data. But Rebecca was gone. FBI audio specialists later isolated something chilling in that final transmission. Two male voices speaking beneath her report discussing survey complete and proceed with Phase 2. The signal itself showed signs of having been recorded and rebroadcast, meaning Rebecca's last words may not have come from the bunker at all. 3 days earlier, she had written a single line in her personal journal. They know that I know. Tomorrow I document everything. The frequency logs she referenced were never found. Someone had taken them, or Rebecca had hidden them somewhere no one has ever discovered. At 4:17 p.m. on August 23, 2023, lightning struck a ridgeline 12 miles northeast of Big Timber, Montana. Within minutes, what would become known as the Sweetgrass Canyon Fire was consuming dry grassland at a rate that stunned even veteran firefighters. The strike occurred in one of the most communication-critical areas of Stillwater County, a region where radio towers and relay stations formed the nervous system connecting thousands of square miles of wilderness to emergency responders. 53 miles away, inside a reinforced concrete communications bunker built into a hillside, senior dispatcher Rebecca Hartwell received the first reports at 4:21 p.m. The 38-year-old communications specialist had spent 18 years coordinating emergency responses across the region's complex web of federal, state, and tribal jurisdictions. Her workspace, lined with banks of radio equipment and multiple computer monitors, served as the nerve center for 4,800 square miles of some of Montana's most remote and challenging terrain. Becca, as she was known to the firefighters and emergency crews she coordinated, had handled everything from backcountry rescues to multi-day wildfire campaigns. Her voice was familiar to smoke jumpers dropping into burning forests, to tribal fire crews protecting sacred lands, and to volunteer firefighters from ranch communities scattered across the high desert plateau. What set Hartwell apart wasn't just her technical expertise with the sophisticated radio relay systems. It was her ability to maintain calm precision while juggling communications between agencies that didn't always work well together. By 6:30 p.m., the Sweetgrass Canyon Fire had grown to 1,200 acres, driven by erratic winds that seemed to shift direction every few hours. Hartwell coordinated deployment of 3 smoke jumper crews from the Missoula base, 2 Type 1 engine companies from Billings, and a helicopter team from the Forest Service Station in Bozeman. More critically, she managed communications between federal crews operating under Forest Service protocols and tribal firefighters working according to traditional fire management practices that had protected these lands for generations. The complexity of the operation required Hartwell to monitor 17 different radio frequencies simultaneously. Federal crews used encrypted channels for tactical coordination. County fire departments operated on VHF frequencies that had served rural Montana for decades. Tribal fire management maintained their own secure networks, coordinating in a mixture of English and Crow language that reflected both modern firefighting techniques and ancestral knowledge of local fire behavior. As darkness fell, the fire's behavior became increasingly unpredictable. Ground crews reported wind directions that contradicted weather station data. Pilots flying night reconnaissance missions described flame patterns that didn't match standard fire behavior models. At 9:15 p.m., Hartwell noted in her dispatch log that multiple agencies were providing conflicting wind speed and direction reports from locations less than 2 miles apart. The situation grew more complex when Smoke Jumper Base Coordinator Jake Morrison radioed that his crews were receiving different tactical orders than what he expected based on fire progression models. Morrison, a 20-year veteran who had worked with Hartwell on dozens of operations, later told investigators that something felt fundamentally wrong about the communication patterns that evening. At 10:45 p.m., during the most critical phase of the firefighting operation, Hartwell transmitted what would become her final status update to all agencies. Her voice, according to audio recordings later analyzed by federal investigators, carried its usual calm authority as she coordinated helicopter water drops with ground crew positions. Nothing in her tone suggested distress or concern. Then, at exactly 11:47 p.m., Rebecca Hartwell's radio went silent. The first indication of trouble came 12 minutes later, when Morrison attempted to relay tactical information through the communications hub. Instead of Hartwell's familiar voice, he heard only static. Repeated attempts to raise the communications center on multiple frequencies yielded nothing. At 12:15 a.m., Morrison made the decision that would transform a firefighting operation into something far more complex. He dispatched a county sheriff's deputy to check on the communications bunker. What Deputy Thomas Yazzie found when he arrived at 12:43 a.m. raised more questions than it answered. The bunker's heavy security door stood slightly ajar, its electronic lock system disabled. Inside, all radio equipment continued to function normally. Banks of monitors still displayed real-time fire progression data, and Hartwell's coffee cup sat half full beside her keyboard. Her personal vehicle remained parked in its usual spot. Her purse sat undisturbed in a locked desk drawer. Rebecca Hartwell had simply vanished. Outside, the Sweetgrass Canyon Fire continued to burn, but now without the coordinated communication that had made Montana's emergency response system one of the most effective in the nation. As word spread through the firefighting community that their lead dispatcher had disappeared during active operations, a single question echoed across every radio frequency. Why would someone with Hartwell's dedication and 18 years of experience abandon her post during the most dangerous phase of fire suppression? To understand Rebecca Hartwell's disappearance, investigators first had to understand the intricate communications network she managed from her isolated bunker. Built in 1987 as part of a Cold War-era emergency communications upgrade, the Stillwater County Remote Communications Hub represented far more than a simple dispatch center. The facility served as the primary relay point connecting federal agencies, state emergency services, tribal fire management, and local volunteer departments across a region larger than some eastern states. The bunker itself, constructed of reinforced concrete and buried 8 feet into a limestone hillside, housed equipment worth over $2 million. Banks of radio transceivers lined the walls, each capable of simultaneously monitoring multiple frequencies while automatically recording all transmissions. Digital repeater systems boosted signals across the high desert terrain, ensuring that a smoke jumper parachuting into a remote canyon could maintain contact with command centers hundreds of miles away. Hartwell's role extended far beyond simple message relay. She served as the human intelligence that made sense of competing jurisdictional priorities, conflicting tactical approaches, and the political complexities that arose when federal, state, tribal, and local agencies operated in the same geographic area. Her computer workstation contained detailed maps showing not only topography and fire risk, but also the complex overlay of land ownership, mineral rights, and jurisdictional boundaries that determined which agency had authority over any given square mile. According to Forest Service Regional Coordinator Maria Santos, who worked with Hartwell for over a decade, Rebecca possessed an almost intuitive understanding of how information flowed through the emergency response network. She could listen to 17 different radio channels and immediately identify when someone was getting information that didn't match what others were reporting, Santos later told investigators. She saved lives by catching those discrepancies before they became disasters. Hartwell's personnel file revealed 18 years of steady advancement through Montana's emergency services hierarchy DITE. She began as a part-time dispatcher for the Stillwater County Sheriff's Office in 2005, earning her emergency medical dispatch certification within 6 months. By 2008, she had completed advanced training in multi-agency incident command systems and federal communications protocols. Her security clearance, upgraded in 2015, allowed her access to encrypted federal frequencies and sensitive operational data. But it was Hartwell's relationships within the emergency services community that made her truly indispensable. She maintained personal contact with fire chiefs across 5 counties, knew the operational preferences of individual smoke jumper crews, and had earned the trust of tribal fire officers who rarely worked closely with federal agencies. Her ability to switch seamlessly between official radio protocol and informal conversation had made her the unofficial diplomat of Montana's complex emergency response community. 3 days before her disappearance, however, something changed. According to maintenance logs discovered by investigators, Hartwell had requested after-hours access to the communications hub to perform what she described as routine frequency optimization. The work, conducted over 2 consecutive nights without supervision, involved modifications to the radio relay systems that went well beyond standard maintenance procedures. Technical analysis later revealed that Hartwell had created unauthorized access points into federal communication networks. The modifications, sophisticated enough to require advanced knowledge of both hardware and software systems, allowed monitoring of encrypted frequencies normally restricted to federal agencies. More troubling, the changes appeared designed to record specific types of transmissions while hiding that recording from standard system logs. Jake Morrison, the smoke jumper base coordinator who had worked with Hartwell for years, noticed changes in her communication patterns during the weeks preceding her disappearance. She started asking different questions, Morrison told investigators. Instead of just coordinating logistics, she wanted to know why certain decisions were being made, who was making them, and what information those decisions were based on. The complexity of Hartwell's unauthorized modifications suggested she was investigating something specific. Computer forensics specialists found evidence that she had been cross-referencing fire incident reports with mineral survey data, land ownership records, and federal permitting databases. The searches, conducted during off-duty hours using her security credentials, painted a picture of someone methodically documenting patterns that weren't immediately obvious. Of particular interest to investigators was Hartwell's focus on historical fire incidents in areas later subject to mineral rights disputes. Her research included detailed analysis of communication failures during previous wildfire responses, with special attention to cases where federal and local agencies provided conflicting information about fire behavior, weather conditions, or tactical priorities. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a communication systems expert who consulted on the investigation, explained the significance of Hartwell's modifications. What she created was essentially a secret monitoring system that could record and analyze communications across multiple agencies without those agencies knowing they were being monitored. This wasn't casual curiosity. It was systematic intelligence gathering. The day before her disappearance, Hartwell had made several unusual phone calls to environmental law firms in Billings and Bozeman. According to phone records, she specifically requested information about whistleblower protections for federal employees and the legal procedures for reporting suspected violations of environmental protection laws. She also contacted a private investigator specializing in government corruption cases. Yet, despite these preparations, Hartwell had shown no sign of distress or concern during her final shift. Her supervisor, Communications Director Robert Fuller, described her demeanor that evening as completely normal, perhaps even more focused than usual. She had arrived early, conducted routine equipment checks, and settled into what appeared to be another standard evening coordinating emergency responses across Montana's vast wilderness. As investigators worked to understand what Hartwell had discovered, one fact became increasingly clear. She had been preparing for something significant. The question that remained was whether she had planned to disappear, or whether someone else had made that decision for her. The audio recording of Rebecca Hartwell's final transmission, archived automatically by the communications hub's digital system, would become the most analyzed piece of evidence in the investigation. At 11:47 p.m. on August 23, 2023, Hartwell's voice transmitted what appeared to be a routine status update to Fire Command. Fire Command, this is Stillwater Communications. Current incident status: 2,400 acres, 35% contained. Night operations proceeding as planned. Helicopter 247, completing final water drop run. Ground crews report wind shift to southwest at 15 knots. Next update at 00:15. But audio specialists at the FBI's Technical Analysis Unit discovered something troubling in the background of that transmission. Using advanced filtering techniques to isolate ambient sound, they identified at least two distinct voices speaking in low conversation behind Hartwell's official report. The voices, both male according to voice pattern analysis, were discussing something that included the phrases "survey complete" and "proceed with phase 2. More disturbing was what the FBI analysts found when they examined the technical characteristics of the transmission itself. The signal showed signs of having been recorded and rebroadcast, suggesting that Hartwell's final status update might not have been transmitted live from the communications bunker. The discovery raised the possibility that someone else had been in the facility when Hartwell disappeared. Someone with enough technical knowledge to manipulate the communications system. Simultaneously, fire behavior analysts were discovering their own set of troubling contradictions. The wind direction and speed data that Hartwell had reported in her final transmission directly contradicted readings from 3 separate weather monitoring stations within a 20-mile radius of the fire. More significantly, the fire's actual behavior over the following hours proved that the wind data reported by ground crews was accurate, while the official weather station readings were somehow incorrect. Dr. Michael Chen, a meteorologist with the National Weather Service who specialized in fire weather analysis, found the discrepancies unprecedented. Weather stations don't suddenly start providing false data, Chen explained to investigators. These are sophisticated instruments with multiple redundancy systems and automated quality control checks. For 3 stations to simultaneously report incorrect wind data suggests either systematic equipment failure or deliberate manipulation. When federal investigators arrived at the communications bunker on August 24th, they found the facility's security systems in a state that raised additional questions. The electronic access logs showed no unusual entry or exit times, but the backup battery system for the security cameras had been disconnected sometime between 10:00 p.m. and midnight. The main power supply to the facility remained functional throughout the night, yet the cameras recorded only static during the critical hours surrounding Hartwell's disappearance. Inside the bunker, investigators discovered that someone had attempted to wipe specific files from Hartwell's computer system. However, the deletion process had been interrupted, leaving partial data that revealed the scope of her unauthorized research. Fragments of files showed extensive documentation of communication irregularities during previous wildfire incidents, with particular focus on cases where fire suppression efforts had been hampered by conflicting information from different agencies. Agent Sarah Martinez of the FBI's Environmental Crime Unit, who led the federal investigation, found patterns in Hartwell's research that suggested systematic coordination between the communication failures and subsequent land use changes. She wasn't just documenting random problems. Martinez later testified in a closed congressional hearing. She was tracking a pattern of incidents where communication breakdowns led to specific outcomes that benefited specific interests. The investigation became more complex when tribal fire management officials raised concerns about the areas threatened by the Sweetgrass Canyon Fire. According to Crow Nation Fire Officer Angela Crow Feather, the fire was advancing towards sites considered sacred by the tribe, areas that had been the subject of ongoing disputes with federal land management agencies and private mineral extraction companies. Those lands hold medicine plants and ceremonial sites that have been protected by our people for generations, Crowfeather told investigators. The fire was moving in directions that seemed designed to burn specific areas while avoiding others. Rebecca understood the significance of those places. She had worked with us to protect them during previous fire seasons. Crowfeather's statement introduced another troubling element to the investigation: The possibility that Hartwell's disappearance was connected to conflicts over land use that extended far beyond firefighting operations. Documents recovered from her research files showed extensive correspondence with environmental lawyers, Native American rights advocates, and government accountability organizations. Meanwhile, the search for Hartwell herself continued across the vast wilderness surrounding the communications bunker. Teams of county sheriff's deputies, federal agents, and volunteer searchers covered hundreds of square miles using helicopters, ATVs, and tracking dogs. The terrain, a mixture of high desert, scattered mountain ranges, and deep canyon systems, provided countless places where someone could disappear, voluntarily or otherwise. But perhaps the most unsettling discovery came when investigators examined the geological survey data for the area burned by the Sweetgrass Canyon Fire. Preliminary reports from the U.S. Geological Survey, compiled just weeks before Hartwell's disappearance, had identified potentially significant mineral deposits beneath the burned area. The deposits, including rare earth elements critical to electronics manufacturing, were estimated to be worth hundreds of millions of dollars. The timing of the geological survey, the communication failures during the fire response, and Hartwell's disappearance created a sequence of events that seemed too coincidental to ignore. Yet proving deliberate coordination between these elements would require evidence that investigators had yet to find. As the first week of the investigation concluded, federal agents faced a fundamental question. Had Rebecca Hartwell stumbled upon a conspiracy that cost her life, or had she chosen to disappear rather than expose what she had discovered? The answer, like Hartwell herself, remained hidden somewhere in the vast Montana wilderness. 3 weeks after the Sweetgrass Canyon Fire was declared fully contained, satellite imagery revealed a burn pattern that puzzled fire behavior specialists across the country. The fire had consumed 8,400 acres in an irregular shape that seemed to defy standard wildfire progression models. More troubling, the burned area precisely avoided several zones that geological surveys had identified as having significant mineral potential, while completely consuming areas that environmental groups had been working to protect as critical habitat. Dr. Amanda Foster, a fire behavior analyst with the Forest Service's Fire Sciences Laboratory in Missoula, conducted the post-fire analysis. Her report, completed 6 weeks after Hartwell's disappearance, documented burn patterns that she described as inconsistent with natural fire behavior given documented weather conditions and terrain features. The fire jumped natural fire breaks in some areas while stopping abruptly at seemingly invisible boundaries in others. In 30 years of analyzing wildfire behavior, I've never seen a fire that seemed to follow property lines rather than topography, Foster told investigators. Her analysis showed that the fire had systematically burned across traditional tribal gathering areas, while leaving adjacent areas with higher fuel loads completely untouched. The precision of these boundaries suggested human intervention on a scale that would have required extensive coordination and resources. Jake Morrison, the smoke jumper base coordinator who had worked the fire from the beginning, reported receiving conflicting dispatch orders throughout the incident. According to Morrison's detailed log, he received instructions to deploy crews to areas where the fire had already been contained, while being told to avoid areas where the fire was actively spreading. The orders, allegedly from Hartwell's communications center, contradicted both standard firefighting protocol and Morrison's direct observations from reconnaissance flights. I kept asking for clarification because the orders didn't make tactical sense, Morrison later told investigators. But every time I questioned the assignments, I was told the orders came directly from Incident Command and were based on updated intelligence that my crews didn't have access to. Only after Hartwell's disappearance did Morrison realize that many of the conflicting orders had come during periods when the communications hub was supposedly operating normally. The investigation revealed that similar communication irregularities had occurred during at least 4 previous wildfire incidents over the past 3 years. In each case, firefighting resources had been deployed in patterns that ultimately benefited specific land development or mineral extraction interests. The fires, the Beartooth Creek Fire of 2021, the Elk Ridge Fire of 2022, and 2 smaller incidents in early 2023, had all occurred in areas later subject to significant land use changes. A review of Hartwell's research files showed that she had identified these patterns months before her disappearance. Her analysis included detailed comparisons between official fire suppression strategies and the actual deployment of resources, revealing systematic discrepancies that she had documented with meticulous precision. She had also compiled evidence showing that communication failures during these incidents consistently benefited the same group of mining and development companies. 2 days after the Sweetgrass Canyon Fire was declared contained, investigators made a discovery that transformed their understanding of the case. Hidden in a grove of cottonwood trees 3 miles from the communications bunker, they found surveying equipment belonging to Mountain West Geological Services, a private company that specialized in mineral exploration. The equipment, including ground-penetrating radar units and soil sampling devices, had been deployed in a pattern suggesting systematic analysis of the area that eventually burned. Mountain West's client list, obtained through federal subpoenas, included several companies that had submitted mineral rights applications for areas burned by the previous suspicious fires. The connection suggested a coordinated effort to use wildfire incidents as cover for mineral exploration, in areas where such activity would normally face environmental and tribal opposition. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the communications systems expert who had analyzed Hartwell's equipment modifications, discovered additional evidence of systematic manipulation. By examining radio transmission logs from multiple agencies during the fire, Walsh found evidence that someone had been intercepting and altering communication between fire command and ground crews. The alterations were subtle but significant, changing wind direction reports, modifying resource availability updates, and providing false information about fire behavior that led to tactical decisions benefiting specific outcomes. What we're looking at is essentially communication warfare, Walsh explained to congressional investigators. Someone with access to federal communication systems was systematically providing false information to manipulate firefighting operations. This required not just technical expertise, but detailed knowledge of how multi-agency fire operations are coordinated. The sophistication of the operation suggested involvement by individuals with security clearances and extensive experience in emergency communications. FBI investigators began focusing on current and former employees of federal agencies who had both the technical skills and access necessary to manipulate communication systems without detection. Meanwhile, tribal authorities provided additional context that helped explain the broader implications of the suspicious fire patterns. According to Crow Nation Environmental Officer Dr. Mary Little Hawk, the burned areas included several sites that had been under federal protection due to their cultural and environmental significance. The fire damage provided legal justification for reclassifying these areas as disturbed lands eligible for commercial development. For generations, our people have protected these places through traditional fire management practices, Dr. Little Hawk testified before a congressional subcommittee. Now we're seeing systematic destruction disguised as natural disaster, followed by immediate applications for development permits. This isn't coincidence, it's environmental colonization. The investigation uncovered evidence that development permits for the burned area had been prepared months before the fire occurred. Applications submitted by subsidiary companies of major mining corporations included detailed environmental impact assessments that seemed to anticipate the specific pattern of fire damage that eventually occurred. As investigators worked to understand the scope of the conspiracy, one question remained central to the case. What had happened to Rebecca Hartwell? Had she discovered the plot and been silenced, or had she chosen to disappear rather than expose information that might implicate federal agencies in systematic environmental destruction? The answer would determine not only the fate of one missing dispatcher, but the integrity of America's emergency response systems. Within 48 hours of Rebecca Hartwell's disappearance, 3 separate agencies had established command posts within a 5-mile radius of the Stillwater County Remote Communications Hub. The FBI claimed jurisdiction under federal communications law. The Forest Service asserted authority over the burned federal lands. The Crow Nation maintained that traditional treaty rights extended their sovereignty over the entire canyon system. Each agency arrived with different protocols, different evidence collection methods, and different theories about what had happened. Special Agent Sarah Martinez of the FBI's Environmental Crime Unit focused on the technical aspects of the communications breach. Someone with sophisticated knowledge tampered with federal emergency frequencies, Martinez stated in an official briefing. This represents a potential threat to national communications infrastructure. Forest Service investigator Captain James Redhawk took a different approach. His team concentrated on the suspicious burn patterns and the coordinated response failures. Redhawk had 23 years of experience with wildfire investigations, including several cases involving arson and insurance fraud. The fire behavior doesn't match the terrain or weather conditions, he noted in his preliminary report. Someone wanted this specific area burned, but it was Tribal Fire Management Officer Angela Crowfeather who provided the most unsettling perspective. During a joint briefing on August 28th, Crowfeather presented historical documents dating back to 1887, showing that the burned area encompassed sacred burial grounds and traditional medicine gathering sites. More significantly, she revealed that mineral rights to the area had been disputed for over a century. My great-grandfather told stories about this canyon, Crowfeather explained to investigators. He said the old ones buried something valuable here, something that wasn't gold or silver. The white miners never found it because they didn't know how to look. Records housed in the Billings Federal Building told a different story. Beginning in 1943, the U.S. Geological Survey had conducted extensive mineral surveys throughout the region. Classified documents, partially released under Freedom of Information Act requests, showed that rare earth elements, critical for modern electronics and defense applications, had been identified in significant concentrations beneath the limestone formations. What made the situation more complex was the discovery that Rebecca Hartwell had been in contact with environmental law attorneys from the Montana Environmental Information Center. Email records recovered from her personal computer showed that she had been discussing potential violations of the National Environmental Policy Act. The emails, dating from February through July 2023, suggested she had documented evidence of unauthorized mining surveys on federal and tribal lands. One email sent to attorney Patricia Grinwood on July 14th, just 9 days before the fire, was particularly revealing. The helicopter flights aren't random. They follow the same grid pattern the geology teams used in the 1980s. Someone is mapping subsurface structures using federal emergency response as cover. No. Witnesses interviewed by all three agencies described unusual vehicle activity in the weeks preceding the fire. Ranch foreman Miguel Santos reported seeing unmarked white trucks near the communication towers on multiple occasions. They had government plates, Santos told FBI investigators, but they weren't Forest Service or county vehicles. Wrong color, wrong equipment. Store owner Janet Mitchell recalled selling detailed topographic maps to 3 different groups of out-of-town visitors during July 2023. They all asked about the same areas, Mitchell remembered. Cave systems, underground water sources, places where the old miners used to work. I thought it was strange, but we get geology students sometimes. The jurisdictional complications intensified when investigators attempted to examine the burned area itself. The FBI secured the communications hub as a potential crime scene. The Forest Service cordoned off the burned acreage for environmental assessment. The tribal government established a cultural protection zone around the burial sites. Each agency prohibited the others from accessing their designated areas. This bureaucratic standoff created a critical gap in the investigation. Physical evidence that might have explained Hartwell's disappearance remained scattered across multiple crime scenes, examined by different teams using incompatible methodologies. No single agency had the complete picture. By late August, frustrated investigators began sharing information informally. What they discovered was a pattern of coordinated deception spanning multiple jurisdictions. The same week Hartwell vanished, similar communication disruptions had occurred at emergency coordination centers in 3 other western states. In each case, the disruptions coincided with suspicious wildfire activity in areas known for rare mineral deposits. The question was no longer just what had happened to Rebecca Hartwell. The question had become whether her disappearance was part of a much larger operation, one that used America's emergency response infrastructure to conceal industrial espionage on a massive scale. Environmental attorney Patricia Greenwood, who had been corresponding with Hartwell, provided additional pieces of the puzzle. Rebecca contacted me because she suspected that someone was using wildfire suppression activities to mask unauthorized geological surveys, Greenwood told investigators. She had documentation showing that certain areas were systematically excluded from fire suppression efforts, allowing surveys to be conducted under the cover of emergency operations. As autumn arrived in the high country, the jurisdictional disputes remained unresolved. Each agency continued its separate investigation, sharing minimal information with the others. Meanwhile, the burned area sat empty and unprotected, accessible to anyone with the resources and motivation to conduct clandestine operations. And somewhere in the vast Montana wilderness, Rebecca Hartwell remained missing, her fate intertwined with questions that extended far beyond a single disappearance in rural Montana. The search for Rebecca Hartwell expanded beyond traditional missing person protocols when investigators realized they were dealing with a case that defied conventional categories. By September 2023, search teams had covered over 2,400 square miles of Montana wilderness using ground crews, helicopters, drones, and specialized technical equipment. Stillwater County Sheriff Dale McKenzie coordinated the largest civilian search operation in the county's history. Over 300 volunteers participated in systematic grid searches throughout the burned area and surrounding canyons. Search and rescue teams from 4 counties contributed personnel and equipment, including thermal imaging cameras and cadaver dogs. "We searched every accessible cave, every drainage, every game trail," McKenzie reported to the Montana Department of Justice. "We found old mining equipment, abandoned campsites, even skeletal remains from historical burials, but nothing connected to Rebecca Hartwell. It's like she vanished into thin air." The lack of physical evidence led investigators to focus more intensively on the digital trail Hartwell had left behind. FBI computer forensics specialist Maria Santos spent 3 weeks analyzing Hartwell's personal computer system, discovering files that painted a picture of someone who had stumbled onto something far more significant than routine emergency communications prop. The encrypted files on Hartwell's computer revealed a methodical investigation that had been ongoing for over a year. She had been tracking patterns in emergency communication traffic, documenting suspicious frequency usage, and mapping helicopter flight paths that didn't correspond to any official operations. Her research showed a level of dedication and sophistication that went well beyond her official duties as a dispatcher. One particularly detailed file, labeled Frequency Analysis July 2023, contained technical data showing that unauthorized transmissions had been using federal emergency channels to coordinate activities across multiple western states. The transmissions used proper authentication codes and followed correct protocol formats, suggesting they came from sources with legitimate access to federal communication systems. Rebecca wasn't just doing her job, FBI Special Agent Martinez concluded after reviewing the files. She was conducting a sophisticated counterintelligence operation from her dispatch station. She knew someone was using emergency frequencies for unauthorized purposes, and she was building a case. Tribal Fire Officer Angela Crowfeather provided crucial context when she shared traditional knowledge about the burned area's geological significance. According to tribal oral histories, the canyon system contained extensive underground chambers that had been used for ceremonies and storage for generations before European settlement. "Our elders always said this place had veins running through it like a body," Crowfeather explained to investigators. "Not just water veins, but paths where different kinds of energy moved through the earth. The mining companies never understood what they were really looking for." Geological surveys confirmed the accuracy of these traditional accounts. The limestone formations in the burned area contained a complex network of natural caves and artificial tunnels created by 19th-century mining operations. More significantly, recent ground-penetrating radar surveys detected numerous voids and anomalies that suggested ongoing excavation activity. This discovery led investigators to examine mining and excavation permits for the region. What they found was a web of shell companies and subsidiary organizations that had filed dozens of survey applications over the past 5 years. The applications were technically legal, but had been submitted by entities with unclear ownership structures and funding sources. Environmental attorney Patricia Greenwood, who had been corresponding with Hartwell, provided additional pieces of the puzzle. Rebecca contacted me because she suspected that someone was using wildfire suppression activities to mask unauthorized geological surveys, Greenwood told investigators. She had documentation showing that certain areas were systematically excluded from fire suppression efforts, allowing surveys to be conducted under the cover of emergency operations. The theory that emerged from these discoveries was both complex and disturbing. Someone with access to federal emergency management systems was coordinating the extraction of valuable materials from protected lands, using wildfire responses to provide cover for illegal mining activities. But this theory raised more questions than it answered. Who had the technical capability to manipulate emergency communication systems so sophisticatedly? What materials were valuable enough to justify such an elaborate operation? And most critically, what had happened to Rebecca Hartwell when she got too close to the truth? Search teams continued their efforts through the early winter months, but the focus gradually shifted from rescue to recovery, and finally to investigation. The mountain snow that began falling in late October effectively ended large-scale ground searches, forcing investigators to rely primarily on the digital evidence Hartwell had left behind. By December 2023, 3 separate federal agencies had opened formal investigations into the communications breaches, the suspicious mining activities, and the ongoing disappearance. Each investigation proceeded independently, with minimal coordination and significant territorial disputes about evidence sharing and procedural authority. The last entry in Rebecca Hartwell's personal journal, dated August 20th, 2023, 3 days before she disappeared, contained a single handwritten line. "They know that I know. Tomorrow I document everything and send copies to Patricia. If something happens to me, the truth is in the frequency logs." The frequency logs she referenced were never found among her personal effects or computer files. Either Rebecca Hartwell had hidden them somewhere investigators couldn't locate them, or someone had taken them before the authorities arrived at the communications hub. As winter settled over the Stillwater County high country, the search for Rebecca Hartwell entered a new phase. One focused less on finding a missing person and more on unraveling a conspiracy that seemed to extend far beyond the boundaries of rural Montana. The question was no longer just where Rebecca Hartwell had gone, but what she had discovered that was worth making her disappear. 6 months after Rebecca Hartwell's disappearance, the missing frequency logs surfaced in the most unexpected location possible: the evidence locker of the Yellowstone County Sheriff's Office, 120 miles southeast of the Stillwater County Remote Communications Hub. The logs had been submitted anonymously through a law office mail drop, accompanied by a typed note that read simply, "Rebecca Hartwell wanted these preserved. The truth is in the patterns." The documents contained detailed technical analysis spanning 14 months, documenting unauthorized use of federal emergency frequencies across 7 western states. FBI analysis confirmed the log's authenticity through digital forensics and handwriting verification. The data they contained supported the theory that a coordinated operation had been using emergency management systems to facilitate illegal resource extraction activities. However, the logs raised as many questions as they answered, particularly regarding who had possession of them during the 6 months they were missing. The frequency intercepts showed that the unauthorized transmissions had been occurring for at least 3 years before Hartwell began documenting them. The operations followed a consistent pattern: wildfire activity in areas with significant mineral deposits, followed by communication disruptions that created gaps in official oversight, followed by increased helicopter and ground vehicle traffic that wasn't reflected in any agency's official records. What made the pattern more disturbing was its geographic scope. Similar operations had occurred in Nevada, Utah, Wyoming, Colorado, and New Mexico, always in remote areas with complex jurisdictional boundaries and valuable mineral deposits. The coordination required suggested resources and access far beyond what any private company or criminal organization could reasonably possess. Forest Service investigator Captain Red Hawk completed his analysis of the Stillwater County fire in February 2024. His final report, partially classified due to national security concerns, concluded that the fire had been deliberately guided to burn specific areas while avoiding others. The burn pattern created access corridors to underground formations while destroying surface evidence of previous survey activities. Someone planned this operation with precision that required detailed knowledge of local weather patterns, terrain features, and emergency response procedures, Red Hawk wrote in his summary. The level of coordination suggests either extensive insider knowledge or direct participation by personnel within federal agencies. Tribal authorities conducted their own investigation, focusing on the cultural and environmental impact of the suspected mining activities. Angela Crow-Feather and a team of tribal historians documented evidence that rare earth elements had been systematically extracted from sacred sites over a period of several years. Our ancestors knew about these minerals, Crow-Feather explained in testimony before the Montana Environmental Review Board. They understood that disturbing them would have consequences for the land and the people. What we're seeing now, the communication disruptions, the missing person, the coordinated deception, these are the consequences of taking what shouldn't be taken. But the investigation took an unexpected turn in May 2024, when mining permits for the burned area were quietly approved by the Bureau of Land Management. The permits were issued to Intermountain Resource Development, a subsidiary of a larger conglomerate with ties to defense contractors and rare earth processing facilities. Environmental attorney Patricia Greenwood challenged the permits through federal court, arguing that the environmental impact assessments had been based on fraudulent data and that the approval process had violated multiple federal laws. Her lawsuit revealed that key decision-makers in the approval process had received the permit applications before the fire occurred, raising questions about whether the entire operation had been planned in advance. Rebecca Hartwell disappeared trying to expose this conspiracy, Greenwood stated in court filings. The evidence shows a coordinated effort to use America's emergency response infrastructure to facilitate the theft of public resources. This case represents a fundamental threat to the integrity of our federal land management systems. Meanwhile, the replacement dispatcher at the Stillwater County Remote Communications Hub, veteran operator Tom Bradley, reported ongoing technical difficulties with the radio systems. Beginning in March 2024, the hub experienced periodic interference on the same frequencies that Hartwell had been monitoring. It's not random static, Bradley reported to county supervisors. The interference follows patterns, almost like coded transmissions. It happens most frequently during overnight hours, when traffic is light and supervisory personnel aren't present. Technical analysis of the interference patterns revealed sophisticated signal manipulation that required professional-grade equipment and detailed knowledge of federal communication protocols. The signals appeared to be testing the security of the upgraded systems that had been installed after Hartwell's disappearance. By late 2024, 3 separate federal investigations had reached contradictory conclusions. The FBI classified the case as an ongoing matter of national security and sealed most evidence from public access. The Forest Service concluded that criminal activity had occurred but lacked jurisdiction to pursue prosecutions. The Bureau of Land Management maintained that all mining permits had been issued according to proper procedures and that no violations had occurred. The only consensus among investigators was that Rebecca Hartwell had discovered something significant enough to justify her disappearance. Whether she had been eliminated by the conspirators or had chosen to disappear for her own protection remained an open question. Today, more than a year after the events at Stillwater County, the questions remain unanswered. The mining operations in the burned area continue under federal permit. The communication hub operates with upgraded security systems, but continues to experience unexplained interference. And somewhere in the vast wilderness of Montana, the truth about what happened to Rebecca Hartwell remains hidden beneath layers of bureaucratic complexity and jurisdictional disputes. The radio frequencies still carry traces of her final transmission, archived in federal databases and tribal memory, a testament to someone who tried to preserve the truth in a system designed to obscure it. Whether Rebecca Hartwell will ever return to tell her story, or whether the story itself will remain forever lost in the static, may depend on questions that extend far beyond the boundaries of rural Montana. If this case stays with you, you're not alone. Here at Unresolved America, we cover cases like this every single day. Stories that deserve to be remembered, questions that refuse to fade. If you want to keep these investigations alive, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a case. Drop a like if this story moved you, and leave a comment telling us which detail haunts you most. Until tomorrow, stay curious, stay vigilant, and never stop asking questions.